Hey everybody, Ken Adams here with Dave George and Joel Ciniero on 100% Uptime. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about outsourcing or nearshoring, a couple of terms there that we'll go over in the podcast today. But let's just get straight to it. Let's find out who Joel is and why we had Joel on today.
All right. Well, thanks guys for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Boy, it's a long and sordid story, but I think some of the fun stops along the way is, just a regular kid born and raised in, California. It was my young adult life. I went to UCLA and really found that I had an interest in finance and such. And so I graduated with a degree in economics and finance. What is my story unfolds, what I think you might find funny about this is my friends and I, as we embarked on our careers, we didn't know what we were going to become or what we necessarily wanted to be, but we had a running joke amongst us. And the joke was, well, we wanted to be sheep herders. And the reason we made that joke is we felt that businesses that didn't have a lot of employees were the best businesses. And so as I tell my story here, I think you'll see the irony in all of that. I would get involved in finance. I would ultimately go on to work in New York. I became a New York Stock Exchange stockbroker. I got involved in M&As. My world was one of finance. And frankly, I liked it. But in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was the dot boom naturally. And I remember sitting, I lived in New York City, funny enough, for a little bit in Philadelphia and New York City. So I was immersed in the finance industry. But I remember sitting in my office looking at the Wall Street Journal and seeing all these young cats, I raised $4 million, I raised $20 million, and all for these crazy IT things, this thing called the internet, right? And there was this IP voice, which was just unheard of at the time, that you could put voice over the internet. And I was thinking to myself, I could work a lot less and make a lot more if I got involved in telecom. And so through my finance connections, I called some pals, and I got a guy, a good friend of mine, says, look, if you really want to get in telecom, I'll get you a job. Now, remember, I knew nothing about telecom at the time.
So Joel, let me interject here. You went from, let's call it the market. What was the pivotal, or what was the real impetus for wanting to get into telecom? I mean, can you go a little deeper than, yes, there was technology and I get it. And there was of course, the .com boom before the bust, but why telecom? Can you speak a little bit about that?
I suppose that, what's kind of funny, and again, these are small things that would come to pay off in my career later, but when you really think about finance, your product is money. And there is no competitive advantage. Money is money, and $1 is as good as another. So the skills you need to develop when you're in finances, you're really selling services and value because your product is the same as everyone else's. And telecom seemed cool because there were real product differentiators. At the time, there were products that were just light years ahead of the telephone, copper lines, things like that, things that I would come to learn. And that one of the nice things is you make a lot of money in finance, but you work really hard. And I was thinking, hey, maybe this is an opportunity to get involved in a market segment that's fun, it's exciting, it's developing. And frankly, maybe I don't have to work as hard. So those are the things that led me to get into telecom.
So I don't know about that work so hard thing.
Yeah.
I sure didn't like telecom when I had to climb up in attics and pull cable, I could tell you.
Well, for those folks that are listening, got a few gray hairs like us, they'll like the next part of the story then. So I switch over into telecom, and just in time for the dot boom. So I didn't get but maybe a year or so of this exciting industry, and all of a sudden the world is falling off the edge. There's companies going out of business like there's no tomorrow. Bankruptcies are everywhere. But what was funny is my finance background would actually pay off because it was a time of consolidation. And I wound up with a company, starting with a company that actually offered wireless internet. And again, at that time, unheard of. It was microwave and laser, building to building, basically WAN, wide area network stuff. but they were well capitalized. And so I was able to use my finance background. I got involved in acquisitions and wound up snapping up a bunch of weaker companies and was able to build a career, for love or money, at least was able to build a career with that. As the market recovered, right? The, wide area networks, MPLS, I'm kind of dating myself, but those who've been around a little bit know those words. And VoIP was starting to develop, and it was coming on strong, but there was still a real fear with, do I give up that box screwed to my wall, or do I go on this magical thing where my PBX is in the cloud and can people hear my phone calls and all of the drama associated with that? It seems funny today, right? Knowing what we now know about VoIP.
Well, if you think about it, though, the fears were kind of spot on because, cellular technology sucked. How many syllables did we lose in conversations? How many dead zones? So that's what people were associating the VoIP experience with, right? Well, if this is going to be as bad as my mobile, I don't want it.
So. Well, and in the early days, all you need to do is have one tough phone call, right? Packet loss. And all those were new words at those times. But the fear was with quality and what was it going to be like, which again, given the technology today is laughable, but those were the fears. However, is that, MPLS kind of became the way to go, or, defined area networks, things like that. Something started to happen. There was the boom, the bust, organic growth. And then what happens is technology starting to develop really quickly. And there became downward pressure. And I think you guys, right, all of us know that what used to be able to get $50 a line soon became 40, soon became 30, soon became 20. And in the market today, your sub 20s easy for, a voice port. And the hardware is cheap. So that compression and downward pressure really led to people looking for other ways to, how am I going to make my company profitable? Well, I was with a CLEC at the time that offered both VoIP, wide area networks, local connectivity, last mile, all that good stuff. And there was some talk about, we should look into a way to lower our labor costs, because for most of us that are listening to this podcast today, your labor costs are your biggest cost component. Absolutely. If you look at your income sheet, that's the number one. And that's typical. We're all the same in that way. So that was the one we looked at, and we started to look into, were there ways that we could lower our labor costs? And ultimately, again, because of my background, I got asked to be the one that led a team that looked into, how do we lower them? Where do we lower them? What's the mechanism? How will it work? And naturally, the idea of offshoring came up.
Can you speak to that a little bit, Joel? That journey that you're talking about there. So you were asked to investigate. Where did that take you?
It's kind of interesting, but again, I think that that there's some fun parts. You see me smiling because there's some fond memories and all of that. But the typical cast of characters. If everyone who's listening, if you could put yourself in my shoes, hey, I want you to go offshore. Where do you start? Well, you go to the typical cast of characters. You get on a plane, you fly to the Philippines. You go to Vietnam, you go to China, you go to India, right? The thing that was funny is being located in the United States, way overshot the mark. It turns out there was an employee whose mom was Central American. But he'd grown up in the United States, right? He went to school at UC Berkeley. There were a lot of U.S. connections. And when he said, "Have you ever considered going to Central America?" I went, "No, that's dangerous. Why would I go there?" But what was funny is it started to sink in. Look, if I was anything, I was a business guy, right, with a finance mind. It's what I knew in my earliest years. And as I'd go home and have dinner, I'd start to noodle it around and think, well, I didn't even know there was outsourcing in Central America. I mean, I thought that, of course, if you outsource, you're in India by definition. You're in the Philippines by definition. Right. So just curiosity really driving me at that point. I got on a plane and went to Central America, went to El Salvador, as a matter of fact. And at the time, El Salvador was listed as one of the most dangerous countries in the world. I went and I had a fabulous time. Couldn't have met nicer people. Found the culture to be so much more in line with what our culture here in the United States. Ultimately, I'm taking a big amount of time here and collapsing it into a few sentences. Ultimately, signed up with services of a call center in El Salvador and made my first training trip in 2010. Flew down to El Salvador, trained a team of about 40 people. Ultimately, wound up, outsourcing several jobs there. The success story is that CLEC would sell to a private equity firm, and without giving away all of the details, would sell for multiple millions of dollars more than they ever could have had they stayed in the United States. So that was, now I'm going to take a pause there because I just threw a lot at you, but that was a huge turning point for a young finance guy who wanted to get into telecom, really didn't know where he was going to go, wound up now touching the fringes of an industry that he swore he would never be involved in when he was a young man in college with his friends. That was the opposite of being a sheep herder, right? Because the sheep herder only has one employee. It's you. Now, the product that made millions of dollars and benefited so many people ultimately was labor. And that's how I got into the outsourcing industry.
So let me ask you a question about that, Joel. So, when I think people hear the term nearshore outsourcing, it's often about, cost cutting, efficiency, like your story, right? They looked at their P&L and their income statement and said, how do we reduce some of these costs? But when you think about it a little bit deeper, what do you believe that companies in the U.S. often misunderstand about building those teams beyond the obvious potential cost savings? You're going across borders, you're going across cultures. Is there something there that they're missing that adds even more value than just the cost savings?
There is, and there's so many little micro stories here that got me. I'm going to try to pick just certain ones that really have value, but let me take a little stop before I answer that question, because something you wouldn't know about me, you wouldn't know that I struggled a little bit morally. I struggled a little bit with the notion of outsourcing. Born and raised in the United States, father served in World War II. As proud of an American as I could be, and the whole notion of offshoring or outsourcing, at least growing up here in the States, was you're stealing jobs, you're ruining the economy of this country. And although I saw the money part of it, there's a part of me that, and I think we all embrace this, we'll do things for money, but we won't do anything for money. And I at least was at a point in my career where I didn't have to do anything for money. And so I had this the kind of this moral conflict. And as I got into this and started seeing the benefits, there were several things that happened. I saw the bright and smiley faces of the people we were employing, creating real jobs, creating real futures, helping people. My kids, funny thing, my kids, this is years ago, they say, "Hey, Dad, what do you do for a living?" And I was trying to answer that. And so I said, and I told them, "So you know what I do? I help people pay mortgages. I help couples send their child to private school. I help somebody buy a brand new car today because by creating these jobs, not just any jobs, these are good paying jobs in the countries that where we're employing people. So we're building something, but more than that, I'm an American before I'm a businessman. And as I saw how outsourcing not only benefited companies, but there's an element of it that really is true. And I heard this from Apple, but I've embellished it myself. Apple said, look, nobody would have an iPhone if I had to produce them here in the United States. They just cost too much money. No, the benefits of having iPhones are far outweighed by the few jobs that were lost to employees here in the United States. And arguably, millions of more people are employed as the result of outsourcing in the case of Apple. I have found that to be true in my case. What we don't do is we don't go into a company and say, you know what, fire 30 people and hire them in Central America. What we do is we say, look, you've got a company, you do something good today. Let's start augmenting your team. And as you have natural attrition, if it's being done better there, move those jobs one by one off. What you'll find is you're able to, if you do that, you'll find that you're able to hire way better people, pay them better, retain your top and most technically oriented talent or your most valuable talent. You can get the best in the business, which allows you to create a company that employs lots of other people, buys lots of services from other people. It is arguable that for every couple of jobs that you outsource, you create 5 or 10 here in the United States, just because you have the money to do it. Make sense?
Yeah, was that your challenge? Was that a challenge, Joel? Though, you know, you would think that U.S. companies might just look at them as an external resource. They would look at them as just another cost on a balance sheet. How did you get those U.S. companies to look at them as extensions of the actual team, as, you know, part of their culture? Like what activities or what did you do, especially early on? I suspect now you have, you know, a more proven and polished way of doing that. But in the beginning, can you speak to some of those challenges that you had and how you overcome them? I think that would be, for me, I'm listening to this and I'm getting it. And obviously you and I have a little bit of history, you know, so for our audience, you know, I've used some of your services, but I'm still, you know, I have my story, but you have so many. So I'm just curious, you know, can you speak to one or two of those stories or, you know, anecdotes that you have about how you were able to take a company that just looked at it as a department that's in some other country, but just a expense, and turn it into actually something that was part of their culture?
I probably could have got you to prompt me with a better question, because this is near and dear to my heart. Ignorance is bliss is really the answer to your question. You know, and actually it was out of ignorance that I was able to touch a nerve with businesses to craft around what people think of. I say, when I meet people, is what do you do for a living? I outsource. And I know that takes them to a place immediately. Takes them to a place where they talk to their credit card company, their cable company. To them, outsourcing is this disconnected, sterile kind of environment. It was really out of ignorance that, because I didn't know any better, I created teams in Central America that were employees. And by that, what I mean was the connection between employer-employee, which is the U.S., the employees in the U.S. With the client, were connected at every level, just like if the employee were in Houston. In fact, people that I when I meet clients and they're like, well, what's it like? Which I find is an odd question, but what's it like? I say, imagine that I'm going to get you a really qualified person, speaks great English. They're going to probably have a way better work ethic than you're used to dealing with in your local economy. Would that work for you? And they go, that worked great. And I go, now pretend they're in Houston. That's exactly what I'm going to give you. The fact that they're in another country should really affects you not at all. They might as well be in Houston or Dallas or in LA. They might have a light Hispanic accent. And so the answer to your question, Dave, is what I discovered, outsourcing didn't have to be sterile or disconnected. And these big outsourcing companies, now they run them like that. The client, for example, the likelihood of you knowing who your employees are, you just wouldn't. You're actually just paying for a service. The service is, I send you a call, you answer it in XYZ seconds, you resolve the call on its, 90% of the time within, 120 seconds or less, and that's the service.
Let me add to that too, because I had the benefit of working with you as well in a previous life, and had the opportunity and experience to go down and train our team in El Salvador. And what I could tell the people that are listening, the team there absolutely 100% believes that they are your direct employee, which A, they are in a sense, and B, they want to represent your company in everything. They wanted the shirts, they wanted hats, they wanted everything to feel the same culture that we feel here. So that's the other thing that's important. I really believe is that the people that I met and the people that I work with now in the outsourcing situation absolutely 100% want to integrate with your business.
It became a differentiator that I did not understand at the time, but it has ultimately become not only a product, but it's actually grown in the industry. You see it a lot more in nearshore, and we'll get into nearshore versus offshore in a minute. But there has to be cultural alignment, and also there has to be the ability to come and see each other. And that's where proximity can really make a difference. So, Dave, the answer is, seeing that you could in effect become a PEO, and PEO, for those that don't know, is Professional Employment Organization. They're widely popular here in the United States. ADP is the name you probably recognize as one of the biggest, but there are several. There's another one Insperity, but they're big. If you don't know what it is, look it up on the internet. You'll learn about a cool employment technique for your company. But they employ your employee, but the employee works for you. And having known about that, I guess I stole that out of my past, even though I didn't know. I basically took the PEO model and brought it to outsourcing, where I'm going to find you a really good employee. I'm going to assign them to you. They're your employee at every level. They listen to you. They take direction from you. If you're unhappy with them, you tell us, and we'll obviously take the role of the HR department and reprimand them, even terminate them should you so choose. But they are your employee at every level, except you don't have any of the employee risk, which is exactly why people use PEOs. And I can offer them way better benefits than you can, because I have way more employees than you do. So I am, in every respect, a PEO, except I'm in another country.
So let's investigate that a little bit, Joel. So I am familiar with the PEO, and I'm familiar with ADP, for example. And so then the art that you're doing, if you will, is you're building teams for your clients in other countries. So the PEO that I'm familiar with is here in the United States, for example, but you're taking that same concept and simply applying it to a different geography, right? Different time zone, different geography.
Right.
With that being said, then, what are you looking for, or what is the what are you looking for in that employee that you're talking about in those other countries that would allow them to thrive in this distributed, workforce, if you will, that's across these cultural divides, across, again, time zones? Is there something that you're looking for so that, as people are listening to this and they're thinking, wow, this sounds interesting, they'll have questions on, well, how do I identify that person? What do you do to help them do that? I think is really where I'm going with this question, and how do you know that person's going to be successful?
That's a good one. Let me start with anybody who's been in business for any amount of time. I may not know a lot about you, but I know you've made at least one bad hire in your career. I don't care how good you are. You made at least one bad hire in your career. It is probably the hardest part of growing and scaling a company. What we do is, obviously there's certain cultural differences. There's alignment, but there are cultural differences, and I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say, look, if you're in Guatemala, El Salvador, or Honduras, there are cultural differences. We have obviously people there that know the culture. It is, and I rely on this a lot, even owning a company that does this. I know that someone who's grown in the culture, it can just take a look at somebody and they can size them up pretty quickly. And they can tell, good one from a bad one on that kind of that first interview, just like we do here in the United States. Everybody's had an interview where you're not 3 sentences into it, and you're thinking, there's no way this guy's getting the job. That's a cultural thing. We know it. Somebody else may not pick it up. So we have people that do that. But more than that, there's an element here where we've got folks that recruiting and hiring is sort of the bane of any company. Most companies listening to this podcast, you're not going to have a recruiting department, a hiring department. You might have an HR person, but they're doing HR, they're doing hiring, they're recruiting, they're onboarding. bigger companies have that stuff because it's expensive to have that big V8 engine just sitting in the garage idling all the time, and then roll it out of the garage when you need it. We provide that. We have recruiters, plural. We are therefore in the market all the time recruiting, so we never have to crank up a recruitment process from zero. And ultimately, we got the ability to both make assessments through tests, and then this cultural measure, which I'm saying is there's some magic to it, but it allows us to get you better than the average Bear employee. And I'd like to add a component to it. Is one thing to go find an employee. It's another thing to offer an employee an environment where the best of the best are applying. And that's something that we just discussed. Imagine now there's all these jobs that are outsourcing jobs that you and I have interfaced with, what we call our cable company, right? Our credit card company. Maybe frustrating for us, but imagine how frustrating it is for the employee. Their job is just to answer phones, read scripts, answer certain ways, and if they can't help you, they can't help you, and that's just the way it is. Imagine now that I find there's good employees that are doing that. Imagine now that I'm offering a job where, hey, you're going to be connected to your client, you're going to talk to him every day, you're going to know his dog's name, and you're going to know their dog's name. You're going to be part of a thinking process. You're not going to be reading a script. Most of the employees listen to this. Most of the companies says your employees don't read scripts. Your employees have a notion, an idea of maybe how things are scripted, but they're interactive. They're like this podcast, right? We didn't write this before we got on. We're talking about it live. That's how we do business here in the United States. That's what our clients want to hear. Imagine now I have a job like that and I'm offering it to an employee in a marketplace where outsourcing is script reading. It would make sense that I could get the best person out of the group of employees that are looking for a job, because I'm not only giving you money, I'm actually giving you something that you don't often get, which is interaction, career path, challenge, growth. Those are important to getting you a good employee. And we often overlook that here in the United States. We say, well, I'm the employer, I'm paying money, therefore people would want to work for me. So
I would say you're adding a dignity component to their work.
Good word.
That's how when you described it just now, that's what came to mind.
Good word.
Now, of course, our audience, many of them are, MSPs, CSPs, other types of technical, organizations. They're still going to say, well, that's great. Love that. I want someone that's engaging. I want someone that has high care. Can you talk about the fact that they're also going to need some technical experience? Can you speak to the prowess of some of the people that you have available to them? Can you speak to their education? Can you speak to things, certifications and so forth that might be of interest to our audience?
Yeah. I think that, again, in an area where we don't often have a lot of experience with, there's an element of fear. And I think the first element of fear that I'm going to say it and we're going to put in a box and move on is I get asked all the time, well, how's the English? And it's like, look, if they didn't speak it, they wouldn't be, they wouldn't be working for you. And in our case, you actually get to talk to the person like in a PEO. You're going to know how the English is before you even make an offer. So the English is great. Move that one along. Technology. And you're right on it. For some strange reason, here in the U.S., as much as we can move technology anywhere, we're so proud that our businesses, particularly CSP and MSP, we're so like, no, I'll do that. I'll just do a remote into your computer and do it. We love that, but for some strange reason, we think that stops at the borders of the United States. There's no technology that we have in the United States that does not exist in any other country around the world, irrespective of economic success. And as you might imagine, if you were a young person growing up in a country with limited economic opportunities, and there's this burgeoning demand in North America, Europe, Australia, there are many wealthy countries that have labor issues, both shortages and our economic issues. It might make sense that you'd go down, get a CompTIA degree for a couple of $100, and all of a sudden double or triple your income in your country. even though that would still be a heck of a good deal here in the United States. There are CCNAs, CCNPs, there's Fortinet, certifications. There's some, I use a funny story, a true story. Big network provider in the northern part of the country. I'm going to names and dates or places I'm going to leave off. They were a Fortinet shop, but I mean, with dyed in the wool, they deployed Fortinet to all their customers. Ultimately, would have start a small firewall team with me. This is several years ago. Over the years, they'd have quite a bit of turnover in their team that all supported Fortinet, and naturally, they're replacing them. But over the years, it would come to pass that the person that worked in Central America for me would outlast them all, and their best and most qualified Fortinet firewall person was in fact in Central America, more qualified, and did the training for the people in the United States. The beauty of technology, particularly for us, for the CSP and MSP family, I'm telling you, it not only exists, that you'll often find it's better deployed just because there are not so many other opportunities. And your opportunity to grow as a young person is to know it and know it well. And all of a sudden, you're not just trying to find a job in your local marketplace in Panama. All of a sudden, your marketplace is the world.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Let me throw another one at you that I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard many times. Well, what about time zone differences? They're not in my time zone.
That's a big one, and it takes me back to when I was kind of the ignorant and hey, we got to outsource, and the first thing I did was get on a plane and fly 22 hours. That seems just ludicrous to me today. And look, there's no bad solution. It really, you have to look at what's important to you. But when time zones are important, and to my clients, time zones are important. And I'm going to give you both. I'm going to give you a perspective that probably you've heard before, but I'm going to add a detail that you wouldn't normally think of unless you owned an outsourcing business. But it's fair to say that it is nice when you want to be culturally aligned. And it's also nice to know you're at work when they're at work. Oftentimes, and we've all dealt with companies that are in Pacific Rim countries, for example, and you send an email and you know very well you're not going to get a response till the next day because their day is night and our night is day for them. And so that's the other nice thing that I sometimes you just screw up in the right direction. And falling into Central America or that part of Latin America for me, really, there was a magic to it that I would later come to learn that it's like being in Texas. Texas is a real popular business or central United States because you can hit the West Coast, East Coast really easy, right? Trucking hubs there,
DFW is a great airport to fly into. Sure.
Yeah. FedEx is right in Memphis, right? It's because it makes geographical sense to deploy a business when all your clients are in that time zone. And in the US, we, coast to coast, we're 3 hours, obviously, I don't take anything away from Hawaii, but, the 49 of the states or 48 of the states are all in the same time zone. So being in a similar time zone makes sense. It makes for quick interaction. There's an alignment from a business perspective, which is supported by the cultural perspective. But here's the one little detail that, again, I never would have imagined until I got into the business. Because when you talk to somebody in the Philippines, for example, say, well, look, we're in time zone. Don't worry. Oh, we're used to working in the middle of the night here. And for in large part, that's true. However, we do cover 24/7 services in the business that I own. And you get a different employee when the employee that wants that sort of that midnight to 7 shift is just a different person. Their lifestyle needs to support that. And so what I find is you rarely get a dad and a mom that have a couple of kids. That person is not taking that midnight shift. You're talking about a different kind of employee. So your hiring pool is smaller. That matters because I often hear from people, I want the best, Well, if you want the best, we need to, my dad used to always say, what's the first rule of rabbit hunting? And it's like, you go where the rabbits are. And so if you want the best, you need to hit a place and a time when the best are available. And I learned, again later, I never would have known it, but I learned if you want to hire people that can only work from midnight to 7, you're cutting a lot of people out of that because their lifestyles are such they just can't do it. If you got to bring your kid to school in the morning, that's a tough shift for you to take. If you want to sit with your kids and do homework with them, that's a tough shift for you to want to take. So being in the central time zone as we are, I have found that I have access to employees that you wouldn't otherwise have access to if I could only select people who wanted to work, 2:00 in the morning, for example. So that's really the answer to the question. The time zone is a nice to have until you want the best of the best, then it's a gotta have.
Right.
So let me put on my skeptic hat for a second here, Joel. And thank you for smiling with that.
Wouldn't be the first time I faced it, so go for it.
No. Obviously, this is all great, anecdotal evidence and so forth. But I think what our audience would love to hear is maybe you sharing a moment where maybe you had an opportunity with a U.S.-based organization, and maybe it didn't start off so smoothly, and then tell us how it was, transformed. How did you get it to be something that was a success in the customer's mind, but also in yours? I think that would be sort of the proof. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Or, so give us a story that actually shows that even when it's a little more difficult, or maybe cultures don't align, or something's not quite working, how it's no different than here in the U.S. when you have hires that just don't quite fit in, but over time they do. Can you give us an example of that?
I'll try to consolidate actually a couple into one, because what's funny? I deal with that probably more than I deal with it that they just go smoothly. One of the things I like about my particular market segment is a lot of my clients are either first-time outsourcers or have had a bad experience in another country, generally Pacific Rim. So there's skepticism going into it. Never outsourced before. Naturally, you're thinking, I'm going to trust these people in another country with the lifeblood of my business. What am I doing? And then people who had a bad, experience, maybe there was a lot of turnover, or there was wage inflation, or the cultural alignment, the clients just couldn't buy into it. And so it was kind of a customer service nightmare for them. Those are my customers. So skeptics, that's why I smiled when you said you're going to be the skeptic. But I've learned there's a couple of rules, and that we work our butts off to get you good people. I made a joke about how there's nobody listening to this podcast. If you've been in business, I know you've made a bad hire in your career. You just have. I've made bad hires in my career. The trick is, do we make more good ones than bad ones? And so there's a way to work around it. One of my biggest fears is when somebody wants to dip their toe into the water and they're like, okay, I'll start, but yeah, I want one person. And if that one person works, then we're in. And it's like, and I'll tell them, say, listen, I'm not sure I'm your provider. There's a lot of companies that'll take your business. I wanted to work, and I know that we're going to work our butts off. We're going to get you good people, but every once in a while, someone's going to get through the filter. They look good on paper. Their references are great. They interview wonderfully, but they may not be a great employee. That's a human function, not a function of the country that we're in. So what I tell clients is this: here's what you want to do. I'm going to set you up for success. You need to start with enough of people, in this case, no less than 3, generally 5. And if you really want to make this work, 3 people's going to cost you about what it costs you for one American, one person here in the United States. So revenue, you're even. You're not saving money, but here's what you are going to save. Look, you start them up, you start to work, and then every team, whether here in the United States or anywhere else, there's your rocket scientists, there's your good, honest plugs, and then there's your losers. You eliminate the losers. And as you eliminate the losers and you bring your middle tier and top tier folks forward, you replace them with new young talent. You've kind of created you've created a train the trainer now. Something that often is overlooked in the United States is we take $150,000 a year guy and we're training $20,000 a year employees in an outsourced environment, and we're worried about hiring one more employee. If you take that $150,000 a year guy and you make him do training 3 or 4 times in a year, you just paid for a team of 5. We're sometimes penny wise and a pound foolish. So the idea is start with a small team. There will be wonderful employees, and if for any reason there's not a wonderful employee, tell you what, that's good news. You have us. We'll eliminate them. We'll find you a new one. Ultimately, you'll wind up with a team of all wonderful employees, not kind of winners, losers, and middle guys like we are used to in the United States. Something we do here, real quick, going to touch on this, but something we do, if you think about your teams and your company, you have the guys or gals that you love, and then you have there's an element of people in your company that are good enough to not get fired. That's not a way to run a company. And I can change that for you by helping you learn about outsourcing. There's never a reason to have mediocrity on your team if you're outsourcing, and somebody else is handling that for you. So the answer is, if you're going to dip your toe in the water, do it at a level that you can afford some failure, because I can't control human nature. I can give you the best shot at it, but I can't control human nature. And don't judge a book by its cover, literally, because you have one bad experience. We're dealing with human beings. They don't change from country to country. And if you get a bad one, just like you don't close because you've had one bad employee here in the United States, you don't close your business up and say, geez, there's nobody good here. Don't do the same thing because you go to another country. That's where the struggles have been, where we bring up a team, there's 1 or 2 bad, they work for a week and they quit, for example. And the client's angry. So, well, how did that happen? Well, they quit. I'm sorry. I did my best to, make sure they stayed, but they fell in love and they moved to Texas. I don't know what to tell you. Don't condemn the whole process based on that. Those have been the times where the client has struggled. They feel like it's the experience of being in another country that was the bad part, when in fact, there's just human nature as part of running any team, and anybody who owns a business knows that. That would be my example.
So that's great advice, Joel. I mean, literally, you're creating a force multiplier, and even from what I would call a risk assessment, you're really not risking any more dollars and cents from an economics perspective of trying 3 people, like you said, and vetting through that process, and ultimately building a stronger team. So if I'm understanding the economics of it, you're absolutely building a team that's a force multiplier. You're getting more capabilities. If let's just go with common sense. If someone's sick, you now have 2 other people that you wouldn't have had before that can cover. I also would assume that there's a little bit of that competitive nature. Like if you have 3 people that are all vying for a certain role or position, or maybe there's different levels available in the organization, that would sort of force them all to achieve better things for themselves, and thus elevate things upward, upward mobility, if you will. Do you see that, or can you?
If you had a bell, I would say ring it. That is my message. Example you and I just used, right? Somebody might say, well, but I'm not saving money. It's like, look, if your only reason to outsource is to save money, there might be other aspects. You need to really look at your business model as a whole. I came out of finance. I told you my product was by definition the same as everyone else's. I just couldn't make it better. I don't care how good we or hard we worked. Technology, in many ways, you share that with money. Dial tone is dial tone is dial tone. Nobody comes to your house, logs into your Wi-Fi and goes, holy mackerel, this is screaming fast internet. Who's your provider?
No,
Nobody
never
says that.
happens.
It's just like money. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, I had no idea how that would come to pay off in my career later, but this is the message. And that's when I say, ring the bell. It's nice to save money. As business owners and entrepreneurs, we should try to save money. However, if I could come in for your today budget and give you 2 times the number of employees as qualified or more qualified, could you grow revenue? And I think that's where we get lost sometimes as entrepreneurs or business owners. Nobody saves their way to success. And I learned this on Wall Street. Nobody saves their way to success. You just can't save enough to be wealthy. You can make enough to be wealthy. And outsourcing gives you that force multiplier. I love that word, and I use that word myself. It's a force multiplier. If you think of your best employee, the one you love and would cut your veins if they were to tender their resignation, imagine if you had 3 of them. What could you do? You would say, well, that would be 3 times the salary. But you'd also say, gee, I could sell 3 times my stuff. My clients would be 3 times happier. That's where the real value is, in the force multiplier. And saving money is important, and it's something that will come, but your initial focus should always be on, I'm going to provide a service that is better, fuller, faster, because my product is like the product I had when I was a young man. It's the same as everyone else's. So the only differentiator, you learn this on Wall Street, your only differentiator is support, service, depth of knowledge. That's the only way somebody buys money from you as compared to buying it from your competitor. It's the only differentiator. And you got to be really, really good at it if you want them to buy money from you. In this case, we're talking about dial tone, WAN, LAN, right? Internet. There is no competitive advantage there.
Yeah, if I put a wrapper on that, Joel, what you just said, I would say that ultimately the benefit is that you're enhancing the outcome of whatever you're doing for your customer and even for your own organization, right? It's not really about the technology. It's not about SD-WAN. It's about the outcomes that are being achieved. So using a nearshore organization like yours and, having that strong team that you're talking about, it ultimately will get your company from A to B faster. It's about agility. It's about knowledge. It's about being able to make the experience better. So to me, what I'm hearing is by embracing nearshoring, you can enhance outcomes. And I think that's really the message that I am taking away from this conversation with you. And I think that our audience needs to hear.
That's, I guess it's funny, obviously didn't plan this, but that's the message to me. I learned that as a young man. Here I am, below these many years later. I believe it. It's part of my business. It's part of what I believe that we sell. And I've seen it enough of times now. Worked with enough of MSPs, for example. Right? That is, you are managing your nickels and dimes when you're an MSP, right? Because all your competitors are nipping away at your heels. I've seen how outsourcing can lower costs, but it's not the drum that I beat, as you now know. But it totally changes their business profile. It changes the way they're seen in the market. It leverages their labor force to create an outcome that their competitors are like scratching their heads. Like, well, I sell all the same stuff and my pricing's as good as theirs. But why are they winning all the deals? Why are their clients talking about them? It's literally creating a solution and that is just better, even though your product is, a commodity. So yes, it's an outcome.
Yeah, and to add to that, Joel, the way I'm looking at it, you have a lot of, 90+% of MSPs are relatively small. They have less than 10 employees here in the United States. So if I just look at that as a data set, being able to hire multiple people in a nearshore environment where it's the same or similar time zone, and now I can embrace the new technologies without taxing my existing staff, well, now I'm okay with bringing on, whatever that new technology is, whether it's RCS, whether it's, a CX solution, whether it's AI and so forth. Now I can embrace that in a more holistic manner, and I'm not afraid of it because, I have that additional skill set and I have that additional bandwidth of people to apply to it. Yeah, I think that's the other thing that I would say is, embracing this allows you to bring on more technologies without necessarily, hurting your existing staff.
Correct. There's an element of savings. I want to touch on it real quick. And again, you're gonna get a whiff of a finance guy again talking to you. But again, I coming into the technology world here. And I'm sure people who are listening to this, you'll relate to this the moment I said, your best, most highly paid IT guy, girl, support person, do they do jobs that are well below what you're paying them for? And like, if you ever have $150,000 a year tech, resetting a password, shame on who? You want to talk to me about saving money when you're throwing it away by having a guy who's $150,000, and I mean guy or woman, obviously, making that kind of money a year, and he's doing anything below what somebody his caliber does. You're not only wasting money, you're losing money, because when they're doing that, they're not performing something that's worth every bit of what you pay them. Bring in that tier 1 or that tier 2. Take anything that confuses or distracts your best player, give it to them, get it off of that person. And now that's an element. You want to talk about saving money? That's saving money. You don't see a difference on your income statement, but you see a difference on your ability to bring in revenue. And so you're absolutely right, David. And I think that is wholly lost on 99% of the MSPs because they are small. The compensation rates for the best technology are high. So what we do to make those businesses work is we get as much out of a resource as we can, which means we work them vertically. Sometimes they're here curing cancer where they should be, and then sometimes they're here, treating
resetting a password, like you said,
flu shots, right? Yeah, right. And that's an insane way to run a business, and you don't need to run a business like that, and that's something that's lost. When it comes to outsourcing, people always say, "Oh, I want to save money." It's like you are saving money, even though your income statement doesn't show it. You're much more efficient, which means you can do more for the same amount of money that you did before. That's saving money.
So, Joel, we talked about a lot of technical, right? I heard you say tier 1, tier 2. Let's shift gears and talk about other types of skilled outsourcing. So, technical is great, and obviously our audience is going to have that interest, I suspect. But can you speak to things like inside sales or customer service, which maybe seems obvious, but what else? Are there other roles that you might think that a U.S. company could potentially outsource, but they're not?
We'll touch on, so inside sales or customer service, but I'm going to go real basic on you here because this is a fun one for me. And again, we're brothers in a way because I'm a U.S. business person. I've certainly owned or had businesses here in the U.S. I obviously have one offshore now, but I don't need to know anything about you other than that you own your own business, and I know you have to bill. I know you have to collect, and I know you've got some sense of you got to put together finances, even if it's just to balance your checkbook. Say there's not a financial statement in sight in your business. You got to balance your checkbook. You got to pay the credit cards. I know that about you without knowing anything about your business. And what I think is funny is that's often lost on companies when it comes to outsourcing. Sometimes you've got to have a really high-end technical resource, and you might want them here in the United States for very specific reasons. But a bookkeeper, right? Or an AP or an AR clerk. Nobody likes AR clerks, right? They call and they're always collecting money, but it's got to be done if you're going to survive. here's a story I like to tell, and then we're going to talk about the ones you mentioned. It's like if you've had a receptionist, an AR clerk, an AP clerk, a billing person. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them without knowing about business. They pretty good, obviously, or they wouldn't work for your company, but not your best employee. They really want to be something else when they grow up. They're either waiting for their script to get, produced, or, they're going to school in the evening to get a degree, right? They're disconnected, but they're doing the job because it suits them at the moment they need to do the job. But it is understood between employee and employer, they're moving on as soon as they get another job. This is not their passion. This is not their career. What might strike you as odd is what's a relatively low paid or medium paid job that is not really liked very much in the United States is a career in another country. Somebody will come to work with a big smile on their face and they'll say with pride, I am the AP manager for XYZ company, right? I'm the billing manager. And they're going to be proud, and they're going to go home there and tell their family, I'm the manager of my company. That doesn't happen in the U.S., and it's a function of our economy. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to say that attitude, like, we've all been to networking events, and anytime you talk to someone in one of those departments, when they introduce themselves, it's more like, I'm in billing. I've never seen anyone excited about being in collections or billing. So that's pretty cool. I like the way you put that across.
Well, and the reason I bring that up first is because that never gets talked about. And when people say, well, what can I outsource? I start there. Moving up the food chain a bit. Yes. Customer service. I think here's the little bit I'm gonna say, but I think we all understand what it is, and everybody's got their CX and kind of their magic, and everyone will tell you their customer service is, oh, you are the company, you're the face of the company, but rarely do we really look for the best people. We get the best that we can afford here in the States. Outsourcing can really change that for you. It can get you a better person, delighted to do the job. But also, this is an area where you want to really think about cultural alignment. Something that I've seen is customers have come and gone, and even as I'm a user of outsourcing, right? I call my cable company, I call my credit card company, and I'm always kind of interested, and I'll ask her, where are you? I'm interested to know what country they're in. There's an element, certain cultures just warm up faster and better on the phone than others. That should be important to you. And you should think about it. That is not just money. That's money and how my client's going to digest this. I want my clients to love my customer service person. Like I own a company, but I can tell you, I have certain employees of mine, they talk to my clients way more than I do. Way more than I do. And I need to know there's a love thing going on there. I need them to love my employees, and I want my employees, therefore, to be lovable as they do, and good at what they do, of course. So customer service, very important. We all say it's important, but what's funny is we don't do the things to show that it's as important to us as we would express with our mouths. And then sales, again, there is a cultural component there. I can take two people equally skilled, same school, took all the same sales courses, and the one that you like's the one you're going to buy from. And you should, again, look for cultural alignment when you do sales. I think that's a real strength in Latin America. It's a loaded deck, obviously, because I have a business there, but irrespective of whether you do business in Latin America or wherever you do it in the world, look for that. Don't just look at, oh, I can get a sales guy for cheap, right? I can get a customer service guy for $10 an hour. That's a great deal. Not a great deal if nobody likes them. So,
right.
Those components should be really important. So that's the answer to your question, Dave. They're force multipliers, particularly in customer service. The way we run businesses here in the States, we have just enough to handle the load because economically, it's kind of how we have to do it. Labor is relatively expensive. When you go into an outsourcing component, you should look at just enough plus about 20 or 25%. It's cheap, it's easy, overhire just a little bit, And again, your clients are going to come away with, wow, these guys really know what they're doing. I know I could buy it for a little bit less for somewhere else, but I'm not moving. That's kind of what you should be looking for when you get into customer service and sales.
Thank you, Joel. Is there anything else that you want to speak to regarding nearshore outsourcing and generally outsourcing, your workforce for our audience? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
There's one small thing, and I hope my passion for it has come across because I truly do love what I do. I love the notion that I employ people, that I pay more. Those aren't just words. I really go to bed at night feeling good about those great days when you're able to do something wonderful. Employee gets a bonus, and they're just, you can just see the big smile on their face. So to that end, there would be one more thing that I think almost never gets talked about, or we wouldn't even imagine. And it really is relevant to nearshoring, but wherever you choose to have a team in the world, get on an airplane. Go see them. You'd be shocked how a little bit of human connection, and I don't care where they are in the world, these are good people. They've got families like you. They got stress at home, right? They're having a problem with their kid as they go from middle school to high school. They are us. And if you get on a plane and you spend a little bit of time with them, that's partly why I think, for me, nearshoring makes a lot of sense, because you can get there in a few hours as compared to 22 hours, but who cares?
Yeah.
Wherever they are, get on an airplane. Don't do it once every 3 years. Do it once a quarter. The best performing teams, I've been doing this 16 years, by far and away, and people go, and I've been asked this, what can I do to get the most out of my team? And it's what I'm telling you about right now. You really want to get the best out of your team? Get on an airplane, visit them at once a quarter, and to the extent that they can, and we do this, if they've got a visa, fly them up to the States. You'd be shocked. You'll transform a economically, efficient team into your best employees, including the United States. And I know that sounds weird, but get on an airplane would be my closing advice on that.
That's great advice, actually.
Yes, thank you, Joel.
We appreciate it.
Ed and I, we appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing information about nearshoring. Can you just, as we close out the show here, can you provide how people can get in touch with you, where to find you, just some basic information so that they can ask you more questions?
Sure. I think in the business world, obviously, my name's Joel Ciniero. I'll spell the last name Ciniero. Find me on LinkedIn. There's not a whole lot of Cineros there, so I'll be pretty easy to find. The company that I own and I've referred to in many ways, although there's been a couple over the years, is in Guatemala. It's called Kongusto. It's Kongusto. The website is that name.co. So either look Kongusto or Kongusto.co. You'll find our website. Those are obviously the easiest ways to get in touch. This one's be a little bit of fun, and hopefully remember who we are. Kongusto is actually Spanish. There's two words. It's C-O-N. So I spelled it a little differently. Gusto. And the joke that I like to make is Guatemala has 19 million people. And I like to say, people say our company name 19 million times a day, because the salutation, if I were to, do something and you were to say, hey, thank you, if you were to thank me for doing something, I would say con gusto. In other words, with pleasure, or I'm happy to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's how the company's name came about. It's the two words con gusto. We misspelled it, stuck it together. And that's how you will find me. Con gusto, Kongusto, or my last name, which is not easy to spell, but the good news is there's not a whole lot of me out there. So you can find me that way.
we're also available, Joel, for our audience to absolutely reach out to us, and we will certainly make those connections between them and you. Again, on behalf of Ken and myself, we really do appreciate you, coming on the show and sharing a bit about you and nearshoring, about your company and so forth. And I'm going to leave it with this. We're building this podcast with the ecosystems gurus, the movers, the shakers, the doers. And we're not just talking to it. We're going to bring people like you on to talk about it. So please like us. Please subscribe to never miss an episode. And give us a shout if there's a topic you want to learn about. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Ken, anything else to add here?
Yeah. So you can find us on our 100% Uptime podcast, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and of course on our website at engagep2p.com, along with a bunch of other videos that we have out there on our YouTube channel as well. So reach out to us, reach out to Joel, subscribe, like Dave said. And if you have any comments or want to see something in particular, let us know below. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everybody.